welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Brandon.
Today, for Valentine's Day, I am joined by my husband, Brandon, to share this case with you. Brandon, let's see, how long have we been married?
88 years.
Exactly.
I think we're coming up on 20.
Yeah. It's late. We had a crazy day. We got to stay up doing homework with the little one. So this episode might be a little more loose than some of the others, but I'm excited. I didn't have to twist his arm too hard to join me.
No, I was voluntold that it'd be best if I come in energetic and excited.
Which you are.
I am.
And I have a crazy case for you. And because this is a Valentine's episode.
They've all been crazy cases. Let's be real.
Yeah, they really are. And they always make me just side-eye. So grab some chocolate, pour a glass of wine, whatever it is, and get ready for a Valentine's story that, if you've been waiting for that perfect someone to come along and haven't found him yet, this will give you pause. If you have the perfect someone.
Yeah, if you told me yesterday that I would be spending my Valentine's Day recording a podcast at 11:30 at night on Valentine's Day, I wouldn't have been expecting to be doing this. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at least this covers your Valentine's gift, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep. It's covered.
Should we jump in?
Let's go.
All right. Once upon a time, Maria, age 15, met a boy named Rob. They kept the relationship a secret until Maria enrolled in college. For years, they kept it a secret. Robert and Maria Marshall were just a young couple in love. Maria was a classic all-American girl. She was warm, loving, smart, kind, and absolutely stunning. And by all accounts, the type of person who deserved a lot better than the fate that awaited her. The two tied the knot in 1963, a few days after Christmas, back when marriage still came with embroidered napkins and dreams of that white picket fence future. And for a while, that's exactly what they built. They quickly started their family, adding 2 boys in quick succession a few years later, followed by their youngest son 5 years after that. Maria took on the role of the doting wife, while Rob climbed the corporate ladder, eventually making a name for himself in the insurance business. He was a natural-born salesman. There's a story that it was basically all but certain he wouldn't graduate from college. He was sitting at a 1.9 GPA, and you needed a 2.0 to graduate. He realized he had a D in math, pretty close to when he was supposed to be done. He went in, talked to the professor, sold himself enough that he changed the grade, and he was able to graduate. The two, Maria and Rob, settled in Toms River, New Jersey, a picturesque town where image was everything. They bought a home there. Then a few years later, they built their dream home. They eventually added an in-ground pool, a boat, a country club membership, a timeshare in Florida, an ivory Cadillac, a yellow Mustang for their oldest son, a Jeep for their middle son, and promises of a Porsche to the youngest when he graduated.
Must be nice.
Must be nice. Maria was beautiful, blonde hair, blue eyes, fair skin, trim, athletic. She always had the best clothes with an extensive wardrobe. She took care of the home, made the best pancakes in the world, according to her sons, and was the ultimate fan for her boys, always involved, always supportive. Thursday, September 6th, 1984, was a perfectly...
Great year, by the way.
Great year. This case with New Jersey, 1984, there were so many connections that I couldn't help but pick it for this Valentines special. So Thursday, September 6th, 1984, was a perfectly ordinary day in the Marshall household. It was a crisp early autumn afternoon in Toms River, the kind of day where the breeze is just cool enough to remind you that summer is slipping away, but not quite cold enough to ruin lunch on the patio at the country club. And that's exactly where Robert and Maria Marshall found themselves that afternoon, sipping iced tea, chatting about the usual suburban nothings, catching up with their oldest son, Robbie, because what better way to spend a weekday than at the country club, right? Robbie, their oldest, had been enrolled at Villanova the year before. After a late night and a couple bad decisions, he found himself out of school for the fall, only allowed to return after a semester passed. His father had been furious. His mother, loving, kind as always. She had helped him figure out a new college for the fall, and honestly, she loved having him home. Because of this, school hadn't started yet for Robbie, and he went to lunch with them. That morning, his mom had woken him up at 11 a.m. Usually, he slept till noon, asking if he would join them at noon. He agreed. Coming down the stairs a little before noon, he asked his mom where his dad was. She responded, "Who knows these days?" 15 minutes later, Rob appeared, rushing late as usual. As they went to get in the car, a new car pulled up. Rob rushed to meet the man, went in the house briefly with him, then returned, seemingly annoyed, and they sped off to lunch. Now, if there's one thing the Marshalls loved, it was routine, and one of their most sacred rituals, a weekly night in Atlantic City. Not just any trip, mind you, a proper high roller evening at Harrah's Marina Casino. Every week, like clockwork, they'd drive the 40 miles south from Toms River, leaving behind PTA meetings and any humdrum of suburban existence for a night of flashing lights, ringing slot machines, and the occasional free shrimp cocktail.
Okay, I'm down.
Atlantic City is something else. It's a good time.
Yeah, we've had a few nights in Atlantic City when we were living in Jersey. I'm actually picturing myself there now. I know the end of summer. I know the vibes. I'm down.
Absolutely.
You got me locked and loaded.
And this was just a couple days after Labor Day. People were still in that summer vibe, essentially.
Summer vibe, no white. I got it.
No white after Labor Day. For the Marshalls heading to Atlantic City, this wasn't just a casual outing. They had VIP treatment. See, Robert Marshall wasn't just some guy playing a few hands of blackjack on the weekends. He had connections. And by connections, I mean he ran entire casino tour buses out of his home.
Wait a minute. Are you talking about those buses that are like a free bus ride and a free breakfast buffet, Atlantic City?
Exactly.
They bus those senior citizens as soon as they get that Social Security check down to Atlantic City.
100%.
Portion of it, yeah. All right, I know. I remember the ones.
And this was his side hustle because Atlantic City just had that draw for him. And, you know, a lot of people's side gigs are selling Tupperware, Avon something, not Robert Marshall. He was that travel agent for gamblers. He'd arrange these group trips to Atlantic City. He would fill buses with the hopefuls looking for their big break at the blackjack table. The casinos, they loved him for it. In return, he was comped extravagantly. We're talking free rooms, gourmet meals, VIP treatment, all of the above. It wasn't just that Robert liked gambling. He had built an entire lifestyle around it. And because being a VIP gambler wasn't quite enough, he had also founded the Winner's Circle, a club designed to teach people how to count cards and blackjack. I mean, obviously, the best way to stay under the radar at a casino is to run an instructional club on how to beat the system. That night, the Marshalls were doing what they did best, heading to Atlantic City for dinner at Meadows, the most expensive of the 6 restaurants at Harrah's Marina. A nice meal, few hands of blackjack, the usual. Just another Thursday, just another night out, nothing out of the ordinary. At 3 a.m., Robbie Marshall woke up to something no kid should ever have to experience. And let me preface this by saying the dad's name is Robert. He goes by Rob. The son's name is Robert. He goes by Robbie. So we'll go back and forth between the two. So Robbie woke up, his father flipping on his light switch, sobbing, covered in blood. Not the I cut myself shaving kind of blood. The soaked shirt, hand shaking, full-blown horror movie kind of blood. And standing next to him, a priest. Now, I don't know about you, but when a Catholic priest shows up unannounced in the middle of the night, it's never for good news. And within seconds, it became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't some gambling mishap or late night fender bender. His mom, Maria, was dead. Robert barely had time to register what was happening before his younger brother, John, he was 13 at the time, and Robbie was 19, was shaken awake, and the two were ushered into what had to be the worst conversation of their lives. Their mother had been murdered, shot at point-blank range by an unknown attacker at a dark, isolated picnic area off the Garden State Parkway, just 10 miles from home. Oyster Creek picnic area. Sounds scenic, right? Maybe a great place for a family barbecue or a quiet afternoon by the water? Yeah, except at 1 a.m., it was basically the setting of every horror movie ever. A few minutes later, the police officers showed up, not wasting any time before taking Rob off to give a formal statement. And that's when the official version of events began to unfold. At least the version Robert wanted the cops to believe.
Okay, that was really heavy. I wasn't ready for all that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm thinking about driving down the GSP, the old Garden State Parkway, down to Atlantic City, and it is super green, beautiful.
Especially compared to here.
Yeah, we got some dry desert here, but
Yeah.
especially coming up into summer, everything is green, a lot of life in it, and this is a heavy conversation for Valentine's Day. Thank you for this.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's fun. I do want to say, after listening to the podcast, like, I've really enjoyed listening to you and your sisters. Yeah, it's been great.
Thanks, baby.
It's a whole different level being in here and being a part of it while it's going. And it's hitting me quite a bit harder, but I'm definitely intrigued. What happened to this lady?
All right, well, buckle up because it's a wild ride. According to Rob, who, let's remember, he was the devastated husband, victim of this tragic, totally random crime. For him, the night had started off perfectly normal. They had dinner, they did some gambling. His game of choice was blackjack. Solid night in Atlantic City. He ended up ahead. Then, as they were heading home, something felt off. Rob thought maybe they were being followed. Maybe someone at the casino had seen them win big at the blackjack table and decided to track them down, follow them. Something waiting for the perfect moment to strike. At some point along the Garden State Parkway, Rob felt like one of the tires was going flat. So naturally, like the responsible driver he was, he pulled over at the nearest safe location, Oyster Creek picnic area. I'd like to pause here to remind everyone that this was New Jersey in the 1980s. If your car might have a flat at 1 a.m., you keep driving. You don't stop in the woods like you're auditioning for the first kill in a slasher film. Anyways, Rob gets out, walks to the back of the car, and boom, he's knocked unconscious. When he finally comes to, his head is bleeding, his cash that was in his front pocket, more than $2,000, gone. And then he sees her, Maria, sprawled face down across the front seat of the car, motionless, a puddle of blood pooling beneath her. She was shot execution style. It was random, brutal, and senseless. A robbery gone wrong.
You said Rob, the dad, walked up on his wife just by chance, murdered on the side of the Garden State Parkway. Okay, check. At
least that's the story so far. To anyone hearing this story at face value, it sounded like something straight out of a crime novel. A high-rolling gambler and his wife targeted by a thief in the dead of night. But to the police, yeah, let's just say they weren't buying it quite as easily. Something felt off. Maybe it was Rob's demeanor. He didn't seem all that sad that Maria was gone. Also, maybe it was the way the crime scene didn't quite match up to his version of events. Maybe it was the fact that this whole thing reeked of a badly written insurance scam. But in that moment, Robert Marshall, the grieving widower, his wife was dead. His sons were devastated. And the real question was, would anyone believe his version of events? By Saturday, September 8th, the initial shock of Maria's murder had settled into something darker. The police, they didn't have any suspects. Just some bullet casings they had found at the crime scene and a theory. This was a robbery gone wrong. At least that's what everyone wanted to believe. Robbie, however, couldn't shake a single thought. Why didn't they shoot my dad, too? It made no sense. If this were a robbery, why leave the one person who could identify them? Why take the time to kill Maria execution style and then just knock Rob on the head and leave? Chris, meanwhile, was wrestling with a different intrusive thought, one he didn't want to have but couldn't ignore. What if my father is involved? I wouldn't forgive him, ever. At the time, it seemed almost unthinkable. And yet, that same afternoon, Robert sat down with Jean, his brother-in-law, the man married to one of Rob's sisters. Jean was steady, logical, the kind of guy you go to when you needed advice. Jean also happened to be a lawyer. And Rob needed advice because Rob had something to get off his chest. Not a murder confession, of course, but Rob chose to reveal his affair. Jean just stared at him because he already knew. Not only that, Maria had known too. Rob, of course, was completely unaware that his wife had been on to him for months. And by months, I mean 9 months. It wasn't just a suspicion. Maria had receipts, literally. In June, Maria had found a folder stuffed with hotel receipts, not just 1 or 2, but a lot. Enough to make it obvious this wasn't for business trips. She confronts Rob, and Rob, because he's the world's worst liar, tells her they were for his clients, which might have been believable on its own, but Maria also had phone records. 40, 50 calls a month to the same number. Oh, and just in case that weren't damning enough, she also found a toiletry bag hidden near his boat supplies. Because apparently if you're cheating, the best place to stash your overnight essentials, next to your fishing gear. Maria knew, and yet when she asked him directly, Rob denied it every single time. There was no affair, there was no mistress, there was nothing to worry about. Just completely normal, innocent man making 50 calls a month to another woman, staying at hotels. Sure, Rob. If the affair wasn't bad enough, the money situation was even worse. The Marshalls weren't just broke, they were drowning. Rob liked to blame Maria's spending habits because, of course, he did, but in reality, Rob was the problem. They were up to their eyeballs in debt. Rob at the time was making $125,000 to $130,000 a year, which in 1984 was big money, and yet it was all gone. And it wasn't just bad financial management. There was also fraud. At some point, Rob had applied for a $100,000 home equity loan and signed Maria's name without telling her. Totally normal. Maria, meanwhile, was done. 2 days before her murder, September 4th, she had called Jean, telling him she was going to confront Rob. She had waited long enough. She had proof. She had backed him into a corner. And on Monday morning, she and Jean were planning to sit Rob down and tell him everything they knew. However, Rob couldn't afford a divorce. And more importantly, he was too concerned about his image to suffer the humiliation of one. So Maria was about to force his hand. Oh, and just to put the final nail in the coffin, Maria had hired a private investigator. She wasn't guessing anymore. She knew what Rob had been doing.
It's not looking too good for our boy.
It's not looking great. Nah. Back in the present, Rob was sitting across from Jean, and instead of looking devastated or even remotely self-reflective, he does something incredible. He shifts the blame. Rob puts his head in his hands and says, if you had told me about Maria's PI, none of this would have happened. Let's pause for a second. That's his takeaway. Not, oh my gosh, my wife is dead. Not, I can't believe this happened to my family. No, if only I'd known about the PI, this all could have been avoided. He told Jean, I would have left Maria sooner if I knew. We wouldn't have been in Atlantic City. It wouldn't have happened. Not she'd still be alive, just I would have left sooner. Wow, Rob, really pulling at those heartstrings. Jean, now fully aware that Rob is the worst, decides to go for the jugular. He asked, do you have any life insurance on Maria? Rob, who was an insurance salesman, barely hesitates before answering, yeah, $1.5 million. And he follows it up with, I use this as a selling tool. It breaks down with resistance for potential buyers. Yep, just a marketing gimmick. At this point, Jean had seen enough. As someone who used to work for the DA, he laid it out plain and simple. He told Rob, if I learn that, 1, the husband is having an affair. 2, the husband is leaving the wife. 3, they are in desperate financial straits. 4, the wife has $1.5 million in insurance on her. And then the wife is shot to death in the front of the seat of the husband's car while the husband walks away with just a bump on the head. What does the husband have when he wakes up? A wife that won't give him an easy divorce? Gone. But he does have $1.5 million. Bingo. Jean tells Rob point blank, you need to tell the authorities, you need to tell your sons before they find out from someone else, and you need a lawyer. Turns out Rob had already retained one, Ray Diario, which is a funny thing for an innocent man to do the day after his wife is murdered. While Rob was busy perfecting his grieving husband performance, his friend and neighbor Sal and his brother-in-law Gene were starting to put the pieces together. The more they talked, the less things seemed to make sense. First of all, why did Rob pull over at Oyster Creek rest stop? It wasn't just random. It wasn't just bad luck. It was rumored that Rob knew that rest stop well, and not because he was a fan of the scenic views. In fact, he and a woman we're going to call Sarah had been caught there before, more than once. Now, just for clarity, Sarah, she didn't live halfway across town. She didn't live in another state. She lived 2 blocks away. And apparently Rob had such strong feelings about privacy that he and Sarah were meeting up at highway rest stops rather than, I don't know, just closing the blinds or going to a motel. So the idea that Rob had happened to pull over at the exact location because of a flat tire, yeah, weird. And speaking of things that made zero sense, Rob's whole "we were followed from the blackjack table" story was sounding dumber by the second. Because let's think about this. Rob wins money at a crowded casino. A mysterious criminal mastermind just so happens to be watching. Said mystery villain then follows him for nearly 40 miles, not robbing him in the parking garage or at a gas station or literally anywhere else, but waiting until the exact moment Rob conveniently pulls over in an isolated picnic area. And then the criminal mastermind does the following: shoots Maria execution style, leaves Rob alive while only briefly knocking him out, steals $2,000 and disappears. Listen, if that was the plan, then this robber was the most selective, overly patient criminal of all time. Oh, and that flat tire? Yeah, it wasn't flat. It was slashed with a knife. When Sal and Jean saw it, they said you couldn't drive 20 feet on it, let alone get safely to a rest stop. Meaning someone, at some point, deliberately sabotaged the tire to force a stop, or probably more likely slashed it after they pulled over to check the tire.
Wait, did it look like the tire had been driven on after it was slashed?
No.
Or, yeah, there you go.
It was not. That's a good question. And here's the kicker with that. Rob Marshall had never changed a tire in his life, not once. Anyone who actually knew Rob knew that there was zero chance this man was about to roll up his sleeves, get dirty, and start changing a tire in the pitch black on the side of the road at 1 a.m. Not happening. And even if the tire really was going flat, why not stop somewhere safe? The toll plaza was just a few miles behind where they stopped. It was lit up. There were officers there. It was a logical place to pull over. Then, say you missed that and you started feeling it go flat. There was a Roy Rogers, which is a 24-hour diner just
Delicious.
4 miles away. Exactly. If Rob was so concerned about the flat, he could have pulled in there. Someone else could have changed it. And then finally, there was Maria. She was terrified of the dark. Maria would never have been okay with stopping in the middle of nowhere in a place with no lights, pitch black. Maria would have insisted they drive to the nearest safe spot. But Rob, maybe he wasn't looking for somewhere safe. Maybe he was looking for somewhere secluded. On Monday, Maria was laid to rest. The funeral was packed, 150, 200 people. A mix of family, friends, neighbors, and plenty of people who just days earlier really had no reason to question Rob Marshall at all. At Maria's memorial service just 1 hour after the funeral, a neighbor straight up yelled at Rob in public, "You better not have anything to do with this." which, let's be real, that's probably not the reaction most grieving widowers get. And then there was Sarah. By Friday, so literally the same day that this happened to Maria, police had already found her and brought her in for questioning. It didn't take long for them to learn just how deep the affair went. Rob and Sarah weren't just an occasional fling. They were meeting up at least 2 to 3 times a week. That's a lot of time to spend on someone who isn't your wife. And now, with a murder, an affair, a slashed tire, and $1.5 million insurance policy in the mix, this was getting spicy. By the way, guess how much $1.5 million in 1984 would be today?
I mean, is it 3 million? 4.5 million?
$4.5 million. Yeah, that's a decent payout. Would cover all of his debts, everything. Before anyone, the police, Maria's own sons, anyone had a chance to ask questions, demand an autopsy, or investigate further, Rob had Maria cremated immediately. Before anyone could even think about a second opinion, her body was turned to ash. Poof, no evidence, no examination, just gone. Super normal, right?
Is it normal to, when there's a suspected murder, like how they
No,
don't keep the body with police or hospital or any? It's just, oh, this was a murder. Let's go ahead and cremate it like it's a.
it's really rare. Usually not the case. And he actually had talked to people a month before, a few weeks before, and made a point of saying out of nowhere, really, that him and Maria wanted to be cremated.
What was the police department?
Hmm?
What was the police department, like the area? What was the name of the?
Tom's River.
So Tom's River Police Department, which
Mm-hmm.
is not Atlantic City,
No.
which he lived in Tom's River.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So the night of the funeral, Rob pulled his oldest son, Robbie, aside. And instead of, talking about grief, Robbie's mother, anything that literally wasn't about himself, Rob had one major concern: his reputation. He sat his son down and basically told him, hey, people in town are going to think I did this, but whatever you hear, don't believe it. It's not real. Robbie was confused. And Rob's explanation: they only care about money. They heard we're having financial problems.
Someone's projecting.
Yeah, exactly. And, Rob's not concerned about the affair, the insurance policy, not the fact that the crime scene made 0 sense. Nope. Rob's take was, people are just jealous, son, because nothing makes you a target of envy quite like your wife getting murdered at a rest stop. Rob may have been somewhat successful in convincing himself that everything was fine, but Robbie, he was starting to feel done. At this point, he was barely holding it together. But there was one thing he made crystal clear. He never wanted to hear the name Sarah again. Not in passing, not in conversation, not ever. Because even with his mother's recent passing, Rob was already talking about Sarah moving in. And you literally can't make this up.
Ew.
Maria had been dead for less than a week, and Rob was already putting together these new arrangements, like a widower on fast forward. That same night, as Robbie was drowning in grief, anger, disbelief, he found something his mother had left behind, a note. It wasn't written for this exact moment, but somehow it was exactly what he needed to see. It read, "Our greatest glory consists of not falling, but of rising every time we fall." A reminder from Maria herself that even in the worst moments of his life, he could still stand back up, which was exactly what he was about to do. The Oyster Creek rest stop was the kind of place that looked creepy even in daylight, but at 1 a.m., it was pitch black. No streetlights, no cameras, which checks 1984. Just an eerie, abandoned pull-off on the side of the Garden State Parkway. The kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie right before something terrible happens. And to top it off, there was a sign, big, clear, impossible to miss, stating, "Area closed after dark, no parking." But somehow this didn't stop Rob from pulling in anyways, and when the police arrived, it was immediately obvious this was no random robbery. Maria's gold jewelry was still on her. Necklace, bracelet, earrings, wedding ring, untouched. The only thing missing, the $2,000 in Rob's pants pocket and Maria's purse. And right next to Maria's lifeless body, a single long-stemmed red rose. I mean, maybe Rob had a flair for the dramatic. And then there's the tire. Rob's whole story rests on the fact that he pulled over because of a possible flat. But here's the problem. The tire wasn't flat. It was slashed. The cut was long, smooth, precise, not the jagged tear you'd expect from road debris. And most damning of all, there were no signs that the tire had been driven on while flat. In other words, the moment Rob pulled over, the tire was fine. Only after he pulled over did it become flat.
Oops.
The police wasted zero time sitting Rob down for questioning, and let's just say it didn't go great for him. The officer asked, "Did your wife think you were cheating on her?"
Yes.
"Officer, were you?"
No.
Sure, Rob, totally believable. Then came the real question. Did you kill your wife?
No.
Again, solid defense. And then, officer, did you have any reason to want her dead?
What kind of question is that?
Yes, the classic, how dare you accuse me of something I clearly did.
Projecting again.
Again. By now, the police already suspected Rob, but they still needed proof. And that proof, it was about to start walking through their door. Maria had hired a private investigator. She had been suspicious for months. She first hired the PI back in December to follow Rob. And this guy, he had receipts. He had months of surveillance, evidence of Rob's affair, and most importantly, a personal connection to Maria. He said she was the kindest, nicest woman I ever met. Maria had confided in him about her fears, telling him, "The way our money's disappearing, I better pay you right now." She did know about the home equity loan. She knew their finances were a mess. She had even started working with an attorney. At one point, she had all the divorce papers ready to go by July 26th. But deep down, Maria still wanted to save her marriage. She held off on filing, paid the PI in August, and waited, hoping for some kind of change. But she never called him back after that. And then by September, she was dead. If there was any doubt left that this was a targeted hit, the quick autopsy that they did have certainly didn't prove otherwise. Maria was shot twice execution style with a .45 caliber gun. The shots were close together, so close that a 50-cent piece could cover both wounds. This wasn't some panicked thief firing blindly. This was deliberate, precise, cold. This was murder for hire. By 1 p.m. that day, the police already knew why, or at least they thought they did. They had discovered Maria's $1.5 million in life insurance.
So wait a minute. When someone is executed, execution style, and you're just coming back from Atlantic City, does makeup run? Does it, can you tell she was scared, crying before, or?
Well, at first, Rob said that she was asleep. Then later, when he testifies in court, he says that she popped the trunk for him and that she yelled something like, "Oh my gosh," something like that. But when investigators got to the scene and found her, she was laying down on top of both of her arms, almost like she had been sleeping. But they don't think that she would have stayed asleep with him pulling off and slowing down, stopping, getting out of the car, things like that. I didn't see any reporting about makeup running, but I think it was really fast from what we know later on. Yeah, good question, though. By 3 p.m. on Friday, so literally the same day, they had found Sarah. They pulled her over. They took her into custody. She was fingerprinted, mugshot, processed, the whole 9 yards. This wasn't just a theory anymore. This was real. She did exactly what you'd expect someone caught in the middle of probably a murder for hire plot. She hired 2 lawyers immediately. And the police, they made sure she knew her rights. They read them to her, then read them again, then made her sign a document stating she understood, and then read them one more time. Because when you're knee-deep in a murder investigation, there are no takebacks. And then Sarah talked. She admitted that within a week of Maria's death, she and Rob had planned to leave their spouses and move in together, which is not exactly what you want to hear when all of this had just happened. But wait, it gets worse. Sarah confessed that last winter, Rob had casually mentioned that Maria's life insurance payout would take care of all of his debts. And then Rob, who, let's be clear, was still very married at this point and actually about to throw a big party to celebrate his 20th wedding anniversary, looked Sarah dead in the eyes and said, "I wish she weren't there." Followed by, "Do you know anyone who does this sort of thing?" Oh, yes, just lighthearted murder talk, which I suppose is what we're doing right now, right?
It is Valentine's Day after all.
Yep. Sarah claims that she shut him down immediately. She told the police, "I didn't want to be involved with anyone who could even consider doing something like that to his wife." Which, fair, but also you kept dating him, so questionable choices, Sarah. The police now had all of these puzzle pieces that they kept trying to fit together. It was just missing a couple crucial ones. So far, in just a couple days, they had a murder scene that didn't match the story, a slashed tire, not a flat one, a wife who had been investigating Rob for months, an insurance policy worth $1.5 million, a girlfriend who had just admitted that Rob had asked about hiring a hitman. Rob was looking awfully suspicious, but all they had was circumstantial. Just 3 days before Maria's murder, on Monday, September 3rd, Rob made one last financial move. He called an insurance agent, sounding urgent. He needed a new policy taken out on his wife for $100,000, and he needed it done immediately. Because, sometimes you wake up and think, I should really increase my wife's life insurance today for no particular reason. The agent went ahead and processed the request, setting up the mandatory medical exam. By Thursday, September 6th, the very day Maria was killed, her insurance exam was complete, cleared, approved, ready to go. This was the man that had come to the house before they went to lunch that had not actually even had a conversation with Maria. And where was Rob on September 6th? After that, casually taking Maria and Robbie to lunch at the country club, smiling, laughing, acting like everything was completely normal.
Wait, does Rob know the insurance people, right?
Yeah, that's what he does for a job. Wealth management, life insurance, all the whole 9 yards.
Okay, maybe knows people that would make a pass on a life insurance claim without.
Exactly.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah, we're good.
Let's say this isn't the first time that had happened.
We've seen some flags here.
Mm-hmm. Yep. In Rob's mind, all of his problems, his affair, his debt, his impending divorce that was coming his way because Maria knew everything, all of this would be solved because Robert Marshall thought he was pulling off the perfect crime. Instead, he was leaving behind a neon-lit trail of stupidity and greed so obvious that it was only a matter of time before it all collapsed. By now, Rob Marshall's random robbery story was falling apart faster than his finances, because what's worse than one huge red flag, a dozen of them, and they were all pointing straight to Rob. Back in July, Maria had seen enough. She handed her lawyer 3 phone numbers, all with the 318 area code, Louisiana. At the time, it probably seemed like just another lead in Rob's sketchy double life, but by July, there had already been more than 20 calls back and forth between Rob and someone in Louisiana. And then, just one day before Maria's murder on September 5th, Rob had called one of those numbers again. But wait, it gets better. On September 6th, Rob made 3 more calls. He called Sarah. She called him back, this time from a payphone down the street. Sarah actually worked as a vice principal at a middle school and was terrified that if the affair got out, she would be fired. So he called the school She called him back. And then she said, I'll call you back again. Went down, found a payphone. And that call lasted 10 minutes. At 9:59, Rob made a call from a coin box in Atlantic City, right near Motor City, where by total coincidence, a man named James Davis from Louisiana was staying that very night. Checked in September 6th, checked out September 7th, paid for double occupancy. And just like that, to detectives, Rob's random robbery was looking a lot more like something different. All right, here's a fun fact. When a normal person takes out a life insurance on their spouse, it's usually one policy, maybe two, if they're feeling particularly financially cautious. Rob, he went for 7, and all but 1 were taken out after he started his affair. So let's break it down. There was $200,000, which were 2 separate $100,000 policies from Rob's own company in Philadelphia. There was a $500,000 life insurance policy that was underwritten in Maryland in September 1983. There was another $500,000 life insurance policy underwritten in New York in February 1984. A $100,000 policy underwritten in California in February 1984. Another $100,000 from Minnesota in April 1984, and another $100,000, that was the Rush policy from September 6th, the same day Maria was murdered, which totals $1.5 million.
Hold on. Can you get multiple life insurance policies anymore?
Why do you want to know?
A little homework. I thought you could have one.
I mean,
supplemental. I didn't know you could get multiple.
I mean, you and I both have one, and then we have one at your work, and then the place we have one for outside of your job keeps sending us stuff that says we can get an additional double.
Yeah, I'm adding
without a medical. Yeah, but they're not completely separate. And think about 500,000 back then. I mean, that's got to be worth like $2 million-ish.
Yeah.
And doing it without Maria's knowledge, doing it without a medical exam,
doing it without justifying why that much. I mean, was she working? What,
no.
Did he have to replace her income?
Exactly. And, you know, that's what he told people was, oh, you just don't understand when a spouse dies, even if they're not working, we have to pay for childcare. We have to, I guess, pay someone to clean. And I
mean, that gets us up to that, you know, in those days, dollars. I mean, 750,000, whatever it is, which is great. I agree. It'd be hard to be a single parent.
Totally.
Imagine. And the money would be such a benefit to really get you to, you know, be able to be there with the kids. But
yeah,
just spending the extra money on extra coverage for the windfall of, yeah, I could retire with a $1.5 million. How great would it be to have $5 million or whatever it was back then?
Sure. And I mean, when he took out like the 2 500,000s and 2 of the 100,000s, his second son was about to graduate from high school. So when all this happened in September, he had already gone away to Lehigh, Pennsylvania for college. So we're talking about one son at home where, I mean, you still need to pay for college. You still need things for him. But to take out that many right in a row, when you've already got one son at college, the other's about to graduate, we're not talking like 2, 3, 4-year-olds anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And actually, in addition to this $1.5 million, on June 18th, Rob tacked on an extra $53,000 in coverage, just randomly, a $20,000 one and a $33,000 one. I mean, it's a lot. When Rob wasn't trying to take out more life insurance on his wife, he was busy losing money in Atlantic City at a record pace. Detectives found that he had 25 visits to Harrah's Casino in 1984 alone. And again, we're only up to the beginning of September. So we're talking 8 full months. He had 93 hours and 7 minutes of documented blackjack play. His average bet was $131 a hand, which, I mean, again, that's a lot. Like over $400 a hand.
Yeah, for me, that feels like some medium high roller there.
Yeah. He had a casino credit line of $10,000, and it showed that he owed the casino about $3,000 at the time. The detectives tried to figure out how much you could lose in 93 hours at $131 a hand. I didn't really find their answer, but they questioned it. While Rob was busy gambling away his family's money, he was sinking into a mountain of debt. Detectives found he had a $20,000 personal loan, another $15,000 loan, a $30,000 loan, all from different banks, a $12,000 loan, and then the recently acquired $100,000 home equity loan, which at the time was ballooned up to $130,000. His personal total financial debt, absolute disaster. As the police learned all of this, they wondered, where does Louisiana fit into this? Let's rewind to June 18th, the same day that Rob increased Maria's life insurance again. They found record that one man from Louisiana was in Atlantic City at Harrah's. And these weren't just some random tourists. They knew Rob. He had met the Marshalls before in April at a birthday party for a son of a friend they shared. Side note, the friends were the Riccios, and they had mafia ties. But here's where things get really suspicious. When police told this man that Maria had been murdered, he didn't react. There was no shock, no confusion, no, oh my gosh, what? Just a blank stare, like he already knew. By September 7th, Friday, the case had exploded. From September 7th to the 16th, Rob spent a ton of time on the phone. Not with family, with lawyers. Long, serious calls about Maria's murder. And not just with any lawyer, with lawyers that had political insiders, political ambitions, the ones that knew everyone. He even talked to the county prosecutor. This prosecutor, he wasn't just any prosecutor. He was a man with political ambitions. He was gunning to be the next DA, which meant this case was about to go very public, very fast. And Rob was scrambling to cover his tracks. Sarah was doing damage control of her own. She went out and got a brand new lawyer just for herself. The one she had in the first place, she was sharing that with Rob. At this point, the message became loud and clear. Every man for himself. Rob Marshall had spent years living on the edge, cheating, gambling, lying, digging himself deeper into debt. And in one single moment, he had convinced himself that if Maria was gone, all of his problems would disappear. Instead, they were about to come crashing down because the police weren't just getting closer. They were finding everything they needed easily. With the robbery gone wrong theory officially dead for investigators, they now had their sights set on Shreveport, Louisiana, because if Rob Marshall had one major flaw, other than murder, it was his horrendous attempts at covering his tracks. With plane tickets and a purpose, detectives flew to Shreveport, looking for the people who were just a little too connected to Rob. And it didn't take long before they found their person of interest. The first stop, Cumber. The detective showed up knocking on his door and politely suggested he come down to the police headquarters for a little chat. Before the detectives arrived in Louisiana, Cumber had called Carol Riccio, the friend he shared with Rob. He had called to wish her a happy birthday. Isn't that sweet? Carol, she was related to John Riccio, the mafia-connected guy who somehow knew both Rob and Rob's girlfriend, Sarah. And Carol broke the news to Cumber before the cops did. Maria Marshall had been murdered, which is a really weird thing for Cumber to find out on a birthday call. Totally innocent, right? Except Cumber had maybe called with the exact question in mind. And when Cumber heard about Maria's murder, he didn't seem surprised, like at all. Next stop, James Davis's house. Detectives knocked on his door, and James Davis did what every guilty person does when they're caught off guard. He went full denial mode. I've never been to New Jersey. I don't know the Marshalls. Get out of my house. So cooperative. But the detectives weren't buying it. They left, but only long enough to get a search warrant. And once they got inside, they found what they thought was a smoking gun, a receipt dated June 25th for a Western Union money order from Toms River, New Jersey. Awkward. Turns out James Davis had received money from New Jersey right around the same time Rob Marshall might have been running out of options. The next piece of the puzzle, James McAllister. McAllister had sent $3,000 to James Davis in Louisiana. But who was McAllister? Because then another payment popped up. $3,000 from James McAllister, then $2,500 from Rob Marshall. Here's the kicker. Both money orders had the exact same handwriting. Oops. Nothing like trying to hide a murder for hire payment and accidentally leaving your literal handwriting all over the evidence. Now, here's where things get even messier. During the investigation, a name kept popping up. Billy Wayne McKinnon. And let me tell you, this guy's an enigma. He was an ex-cop turned real estate guy, a car salesman, sometimes a private investigator. Oh, and also dabbled in bank robberies. Because why have one crime specialty when you can have them all? McKinnon had been involved in a whole lineup of shady activities, but somehow he had never been arrested. Why? Because he had an agreement with local law enforcement. See, McKinnon had snitched on his fellow bank robbers. In exchange, the police had basically looked the other way when it came to his other crimes. But now McKinnon was about to find himself caught up in something way bigger. Rob Marshall had thought he was being smart. He thought hiring a hitman across state lines would make it impossible to trace. He thought cash payments and fake names would keep him off the radar. Instead, the money was tracked, the connections were exposed, and the criminals he trusted, they were all talking. At this point, detectives had been in Louisiana for 9 days, chasing down every thread in Rob Marshall's plot. And while everything was still technically circumstantial, the picture was becoming crystal clear. They had the money trail, they had the phone records, and they had men panicking and tripping over their own lives. Detectives zeroed in on Cumber, a key middleman in the whole operation. They had proof that he and McKinnon were connected to Rob. And now, Cumber was in deep. When confronted with the evidence, he immediately cracked, but only enough to try to save himself. I didn't do it. I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't know about it until after it happened. Okay. What Cumber did admit was that he was used to pass messages back and forth. He insisted he thought this was just an investigation, nothing more. Sure, Jan. Here's where things got even messier. Turns out McKinnon wasn't just some random guy. He went by multiple names. James Davis and sometimes James McAllister, which was the name that Rob had used to send money. He had talked to Rob over 30 times, and every time the police pushed Cumber for details, his story changed. On September 10th, McKinnon came to see Cumber with his wife, and he had a message. Good news, everything is taken care of. Then, in a moment of pure criminal genius, McKinnon asked Cumber to get a newspaper from New Jersey so he could read about the robbery. Cumber called a friend in New Jersey to get the paper. However, that paper was never sent. With all the chaos, detectives finally made their move. They arrested Cumber for conspiracy to commit murder, setting his bail at $1.5 million. Cumber was the first arrest. When they went to send his house, it was weird. It was locked down like a fortress. There were bars on all the windows and a massive block fence surrounding the property. By September 25th, another key player agreed to talk, James Davis. Davis had known McKinnon for 15 years, and when McKinnon came asking him to pick up money, he did it. But Davis swore up and down he had never been to New Jersey, he didn't know the Marshalls, and actually he had never even met Cumber. Totally airtight story. The next day, James Davis took a polygraph test and failed. The results showed that Davis knew who shot Maria, and he knew a lot more details than he was letting on. At this point, money was doing the talking. The first money order had gone out on June 13th. And now police had proof that 2 money orders, the $3,000 and the $2,500, had been sent in June. Now, this case is already wild, but then it went full movie mode. After 9 straight days of chasing leads, detectives decided to hit a local club that night. As they were there drinking, chatting, trying to unwind, guess who just happened to be there on the dance floor having the time of his life? McKinnon. Because, if you've just completed some murder for hire plot, what better way to lay low than partying in public, I guess? The second McKinnon's lawyer saw the cops, he sprinted across the dance floor to warn McKinnon. They both immediately bolted for the exit. The cops ran after him. McKinnon and his lawyer raced to a Cadillac, jumped in, and sped off like maybe Fast and the Furious. The cops jumped in their car, and then they noticed their own car had a completely flat tire, the right rear tire.
Was it slashed?
It was. Police suspect that McKinnon and his lawyer slashed the cop's tire before making their getaway, which is a chef's kiss to criminal behavior. The next day, the cops flew home, but they had everything they needed. On September 27th, Sarah met with investigators again, and this time she was done protecting Rob. She had more details, more invoices, receipts, phone records, and more reason to finally tell the truth. Rob had come up with one final desperate plan to explain why he had so many connections to Louisiana. According to Sarah, just a week or two before, Rob told her that his lawyer was flying to Louisiana to come up with quote-unquote alternative reasons for why he had so many calls and money transfers to the guys down there. He said it was something about betting on a game and losing at that birthday party. Rob, though, he was thrilled about his plan, like over the moon, grinning like an idiot thrilled. But because this was Rob Marshall, he wouldn't tell her anything else. Sarah also shared that Rob had already started selling Maria's jewelry, not donating it, not keeping it for her sons, selling it. And to make things even worse, he asked Sarah to sell Maria's furs in New York City. Sarah also had no idea just how bad Rob's money problems were before then. She thought he was maybe $100,000 in debt. Reality check, he was more than $200,000 in debt. At least $50,000 from the home equity loan he had put into stock investments. The stocks tanked. He lost more than half that money instantly. And she knew that he had forged Maria's name on at least one of the life insurance policies and the home equity. Turns out, Rob also had been talking about hiring a hitman way longer than anyone thought. Sarah now admitted that it was as far back as November in 1983 that Rob had asked her if she knew anyone to help with the wife situation. The wife situation. On September 27th, Rob checked into a hotel alone. Not just any hotel, the exact same hotel he used to go to with Sarah. The front desk clerk recognized him immediately and then called the cops. Detectives moved fast. They got a room next to his. They followed him. When he went to get a Coke, they followed him when he went to the front desk. Then they saw when he dropped something into a box for outgoing mail. After Rob walked away, a detective casually checked the mail bin, and that's when they saw it. An envelope with writing on the back. Rob had written in big dramatic letters, "To be opened in the event of my death."
Oh, come on.
He had put a prescription sleeping pill or multiple in his drink, but he didn't like the way it tasted, so he didn't drink any and he went to sleep. The investigators, having seen the envelope he put in the outgoing mail, started calling his room at regular intervals. When he answered, they hung up. When he didn't answer, around 1 a.m., they rushed in and also called paramedics. Rob was taken to the hospital, but he hadn't really taken anything. He had just fallen asleep, so he was released pretty quickly. On October 2nd, detectives got their hands on those tapes that Rob had recorded that night. That's what was in the envelope. He had a tape, one for each of his sons, and then also one for his brother-in-law, Gene. The content, exactly what you'd expect from Rob Marshall, master manipulator. Each tape contained how much he loved them, how sorry he was, his thoughts for each of their futures, and, promising them each their new car, how innocent he was, how he was going to be found guilty anyways, and how he didn't want them to be dragged through the mud. The tape for Jean detectives listened to last. It was special. It laid out Rob's alternative story, the one where everything was just a big misunderstanding with McKinnon and Davis, because Rob still thought he could spin his way out of this. Detectives had seen enough. It was time to start making arrests. On October 11th, they flew back to Louisiana to bring in the men who had actually orchestrated this hit, McKinnon and James Davis. Both were arrested without incident. By December 3rd, the two men were finally extradited to New Jersey. And suddenly, Rob Marshall wasn't the only one sweating. McKinnon was facing serious charges. So he did what every self-serving criminal does. He took a deal that the detectives presented to him, a deal that involved witness protection and an incredibly reduced plea and sentence. Instead of life in prison, he would get 5 years. What they needed was the name of the man who did indeed pull the trigger. The whole deal was contingent on this. They had to know that McKinnon wasn't the one that pulled the trigger, and they had to know who was. They also needed to know all the details of what had happened. They also told McKinnon they had a tape where Rob points to him for everything. McKinnon and his lawyer didn't believe them, so they played it for him. The response from McKinnon was pure loathing. McKinnon, you could tell, hated Rob Marshall. He said, "Rob is stupid. You ought to put him to death for that." Then McKinnon really made his stance clear. That son of a bitch is trying to frame me. McKinnon insisted he didn't pull the trigger. He was willing to testify in exchange for no more than 5 years in prison, a shot at parole after only 1 year. Not a bad deal for a man who literally arranged this murder. McKinnon's response? Okay, we got a deal. And just like that, Rob Marshall's last hope of avoiding prison was gone. Rob had spent his entire life gambling with his marriage, gambling with his finances, and then gambling that he could orchestrate a murder and walk free. On December 14th, McKinnon sat down with detectives. And when he started talking, he didn't stop for 2 days. What came out? The entire murder for hire plot in full, every brutal detail. McKinnon made one thing very clear. Cumber did indeed know exactly who he was. Also, Cumber knew Rob Marshall wanted his wife murdered. It started with a simple lie. Cumber had told McKinnon that Rob just wanted some information for maybe a divorce, a domestic dispute, nothing major. When Rob met McKinnon in Atlantic City at Harrah's Casino, his place, you definitely want to do it in a place where you're well known and, I don't even know. Rob said he was rich, he had status, and he needed someone discreet. McKinnon told him he needed $5,000 up front sent to James Davis as a middleman. Rob only sent $2,500 at first, meaning McKinnon had to come back for the rest. McKinnon flew to New Jersey on June 17th, and Rob personally brought him the rest of the cash on June 18th. But this time, Rob wasn't talking about a divorce investigation anymore. Rob was fidgety, nervous, and then he just came out with it. "What I really want is my wife done away with." McKinnon said, "What do you mean, done away with? Disposed of? What?" Rob said, "No, I don't want a divorce. Kill her." McKinnon said, "Kill her?" McKinnon named his price, $100,000. Rob agreed to pay him $65,000 instead. Rob handed over $10,000 on the spot. So now McKinnon had been paid $15,000. And then just to drive home how absolutely insane he was, Rob wanted it done that night. McKinnon told him that was insane. These things take time, 6 months, a year. Rob had responded, "I don't have 6 months. I need it done now." Oh, okay. Well, let's just go ahead and schedule that murder like it's a dentist appointment, I guess. Rob had stipulations and even added, I don't want to mar the beauty of my wife, Maria. McKinnon's response, you're crazy. I mean, even for a hitman to think that Rob was out of his mind, that's saying something. That night, however, McKinnon went to check out the restaurant where Maria would be, like Rob had instructed. He was shocked to find that it was packed. So many people, tons of lights, too much risk, completely stupid. McKinnon told Rob it couldn't be done. Rob's response? Fine. Can you do it Friday? Okay. Rob sent another $3,000, and then he began calling McKinnon constantly. By July 17th, McKinnon had headed back to New Jersey, this time staying at the Beachcomber Hotel. They met in the lobby, and McKinnon told Rob that he needed more money. Rob, panicking, running out of time, handed over another $7,000. McKinnon saw Maria that night at the casino. He thought she was stunning. She was holding a long stem rose, and for whatever reason, he just did not want to go through with it. McKinnon returned to Louisiana, and Rob was furious. Rob and McKinnon talked again on July 24th. Then, on August 5th, Rob tried one more time to set the date. Rob made a final offer. If the job is done by Labor Day, I'll give you an extra $15,000. By August 31st, there was another player that entered the scene, Larry Thompson. Thompson called McKinnon with a chilling warning. Rob Marshall has put in a call to have you killed for $75,000. Seems weird. Larry asked McKinnon why he hadn't killed Maria yet. McKinnon's answer, because I didn't want to kill her. McKinnon explained that he thought he could just drag this out, see how much money he could get from this guy, and never actually go back to New Jersey. But when Larry Thompson came to him with the news about a hit on himself, he realized someone somewhere was going to take out Maria, and he couldn't avoid it forever. When detectives started digging into Thompson's past, they found something horrifying. Thompson had been robbing banks since the 1960s. His first wife died mysteriously in a fishing accident. He was always the main suspect, but never convicted. And then in 1979, the wife of a close friend to Thompson was murdered, shot the exact same way as Maria. Same method, execution style, written off as a robbery gone wrong. No one was ever charged. There was no evidence. This friend made a lot of money after his wife died from all the insurance he had on her. It was too similar for detectives to ignore. As they listened to McKinnon's full confession, they couldn't shake the feeling Larry Thompson had definitely done this before. By September 6, 1984, Rob Marshall was out of patience. The job had to be done that night. And so, just after 11 a.m., he met McKinnon at mile marker 76. The goal? They were going to scout out the perfect location. Rob took McKinnon to two different locations, places that in Rob's mind would be great for a murder. McKinnon turned them both down. Too risky, lights, too close to the Garden State Parkway, too many people, too exposed. Then, Rob brought him to Oyster Creek picnic area. McKinnon agreed. It was isolated, it was dark, it was off the highway, a place people only pulled over if they had no other choice. This was the spot. McKinnon and Larry Thompson put together a final plan. To make it look believable, Rob was going to have to get shot too. Rob was not a fan. He freaked out when McKinnon told him, "You can't shoot me. You have to do something else." Classic Rob, willing to have his wife executed, but not willing to take a bullet to sell the story. McKinnon stated that Rob was sweating profusely and he could see the panic setting in. Finally, he offered a compromise. "Hit me on the head, but don't shoot me." I mean, okay. McKinnon waited in the shadows for Rob's car. Around midnight, he had dropped off Larry Thompson at the Oyster Creek rest stop and he was waiting around the toll booth for when Rob's car would pass. When he saw it, he quickly called the payphone to give Thompson a heads up. McKinnon thought while doing so, man, there is still a lot of traffic even at this hour. Once Rob and Maria stopped, Thompson moved in. He said that Maria never saw it coming. A .45 caliber execution, point blank, no hesitation. Thompson took Maria's purse, hoping to sell the robbery motive. He was pissed when he later found that there was only $400 inside. Rob, meanwhile, had lied about how much cash he was carrying. He had told McKinnon that he'd have at least $15,000 in his pants pocket. In reality, $2,000. After the hit, the men drove along the Garden State Parkway. There was one last thing to do. Get rid of the gun, get rid of the purse. They drove to a bridge and tossed the murder weapon into the ocean and tossed the purse a little while later. With Maria's body left behind, the hitmen drove straight to Atlantic City. Thompson, he was looking for a sex worker. McKinnon, he wanted fries. He wanted a burger. He wanted food. The next day, they drove all the way back to Louisiana. By the time the sun rose, Maria was dead. Rob was playing grieving husband, and the hitmen were hundreds of miles away. McKinnon's story matched every detail the police already had, even down to evidence that had never been released to the public. Rob Marshall had spent quite a while thinking he was the smartest guy in the room. But the moment McKinnon started talking, it was game over. McKinnon gave them the full timeline, the money transfers, the exact words that Rob had used when he asked for the murder, the failed attempts previous to September 6th, the fact that Rob even tried to have McKinnon killed when things weren't moving fast enough. By mid-December, the net had fully closed in. McKinnon had already signed his sworn statement on December 15th, 1984. With McKinnon's confession in hand, police officially charged Larry Davis on December 17th. On December 19th, police made their move. Rob Marshall was arrested. Why so suddenly? Because it had been reported that Rob was planning to flee to Costa Rica. They couldn't risk losing him forever, so they took him immediately. No more delays, no more excuses, just handcuffs, a jail cell, and the start of his reckoning. That same day, Rob's sons, Robbie, Chris, and John, were told the news by Sal. Rob had been arrested. They were in shock, none of them wanting to believe that their father was actually behind this. Rob's initial bail was set at $2 million. However, after the judge reviewed McKinnon's sworn statement, prosecutors changed it. Rob Marshall was now held without bail. And the biggest blow yet, the prosecutor announced that he would be seeking the death penalty, which had recently been added in New Jersey. For Robbie, Chris, and John, this was the day their world shattered. On Christmas Eve, Sal, their neighbor and friend, visited the boys. For Robbie and Chris, it was the hardest conversation of their lives. Robbie wanted to stand behind his dad 100%. And remember, he's the oldest. Chris, just 1 year younger, refused. Robbie believed in their father. Chris saw the truth. In the end, they agreed to disagree, because no matter what, they were still brothers. By the time Rob went to trial, his chances of walking free were about as good as his blackjack strategy, which is to say, terrible. That did not stop Rob from trying to play the odds. His first move was pushing for a change of venue, arguing that the people of Toms River knew him too well, which I think is lawyer speak for everyone in town thinks he's guilty. The trial was moved an hour away to Mays Landing, not exactly a cross-country relocation, but still far enough that Rob thought he had a shot. The judge, straight out of Atlantic City, had 14 years on the bench, an impeccable record, barely ever reversed on appeal. And 3 casino employees ended up on the jury. And actually, the lead foreman worked at Harrah's as a blackjack dealer. The man trying the case was Kevin Kelly. He was from Newark, grew up tough. He had no patience for bullshit. And as it turned out, Rob had already tried to sell him insurance, because of course he did. Back when Kelly had very first moved to town, Rob had approached him, trying to sell him a mutual fund or a policy. When Kelly saw Maria's murder in the newspaper, he had one immediate reaction. Bullshit. The same day he saw this story, he told his mom, who was visiting him, I bet there's an insurance payout. And I would bet a lot of money there's a girlfriend. Ding, ding, ding. So when Kelly saw the case would be in their office, he did something he had never done before. He asked for it because this was going to be his last case before devoting his full attention to his own practice. And he was not about to lose. Kelly actually felt like he hated Robert Marshall with everything in him. Rob showed up to court day one wearing his wedding ring, because of course he did. It took 2 full weeks to pick the jury. Kelly, after the jury was picked, had a strategy for day one. He was going to appear plain, appear unassuming, and act like he wasn't actually as smart as he was. Meanwhile, Rob's defense attorney, Carl C. Lee, who was a big-name lawyer from Philadelphia, was gearing up for a fight. But here's the thing. Robert wasn't just on trial. He was being tried alongside Larry Thompson. And Larry Thompson, there was nothing to tie him to this crime. He basically was just along for the ride. So our people on trial right now, we have Rob Marshall and Larry Thompson being tried together because they were both eligible for the death penalty. James Davis, his charges were dismissed, and Cumber would be tried separately. With the jury finally selected, it was time to find out, was Rob Marshall charming enough to sway the jury? Would his high-powered lawyer from Philly work his legal magic? Would his wedding ring make anyone forget that he had tried to have Maria killed multiple times? Presiding over the trial was Judge Greenberg, a man so gentle and patient he could have passed for a pediatrician. He had the kind of demeanor that would fit right into a Norman Rockwell painting, which made all of it the more damning when he seemed to have no sympathy for Rob Marshall. Larry Thompson had his own lawyer, an old war horse from the early 60s. He was smart, he was experienced, he was dangerous in the courtroom. But as it turned out, he didn't even need to be, because Larry Thompson, he had 6 people testify that he was in Louisiana when Maria was murdered. They had no physical evidence against him, only McKinnon's word. And McKinnon's word, not great. He said what he said to get his deal. When it came time for his defense to present their case, they wrapped up in 2 hours. That's how little there was tying Thompson to this crime. By the time Rob Marshall took the stand, he was out of moves and out of luck. While Thompson was practically coasting, Rob Marshall was getting torn apart. Kevin Kelly, who again despised Rob, was not about to let him slide. First, he called out Rob's pathetic attempt to look like the grieving husband. Kelly said, "Rob, are you still wearing your wedding ring?" Rob, "Yes." Kelly, but you never picked up Maria's ashes.
Oh.
Right? Boom. Strike 1. Then Kelly went for strike 2, and it was a big one. He exposed Rob's new relationship, not with Sarah. Sarah had broken up with Rob the end of September in 1984, and we're now at the end of 1985. Apparently, there was a new flame, because barely a month after Maria was murdered, Rob had traveled to Florida. He met up with a couple. He had been friends with the husband for quite a while, and only a year later was now engaged to that wife. Her name, Molly Stevens. She was married to one of Rob's great friends, Jim Stevens, and now she was Rob's fiance. Kelly didn't just bring it up, he hammered it in. "Did you tell your kids?" Quote, "Molly Stevens is just like Mom. You're really going to like her." Disgusting.
That's a quote from Rob.
Yeah, that's what Rob told his sons, and his sons had testified to. Also, the reason that they knew about this was because Rob wanted a, what's it called, visit? A conjugal visit?
Ooh.
Yeah, so he sent in a note saying that she was his soon-to-be wife. And just to twist that knife deep, Rob gave Molly money for a car when he was in Florida the first time. a month after Maria died. You know, you're deeply in debt, but you've got some life insurance money coming your way. Why not throw cash at that? Well, Rob was busy unintentionally digging his own grave in court. He was also actively trying to drag his own son down with him. The night before Robbie was set to testify, Rob called him, not for a father to son heart to heart. Rob wanted Robbie to lie, to cover for him, to say Rob hadn't been gone when he was, the morning before they went to lunch at the country club. Robbie was shocked. He couldn't believe what he was being asked to do. He said he needed time to think. His father said he'd call back an hour later. Rob called again, right on time. Robbie said, "I know you weren't there." And Rob said, "Do you have any problem saying I was?" Robbie said, "That would be a lie, Dad." Rob said, "Just think about it. I really need this. My life is on the line." Then he told Robbie he'd call back in an hour. That next phone call, Robbie was the one to hang up on Rob. The next day, Robbie took the stand and told the truth. His father had tried to manipulate him. Robbie refused to play that game. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Closing arguments took place on Monday, March 3rd. Then the jury came back pretty quick with their decision. Larry Thompson, not guilty. There was nothing there, just McKinnon's word, and that wasn't enough. Then Rob Marshall, guilty. When the words were read, Robbie and Chris began to sob. They'd always suspected the worst, but now this was worse than not knowing. Why, Dad? How could you? Because the death penalty was on the table, the jury went back to deliberate whether that would be his punishment. It took only 90 minutes for the jury to deliberate this. They came back. Rob Marshall was sentenced to death, which meant solitary confinement, no contact with anyone, no chance of walking free. The Marshall boys, they had lost both parents in one moment. Rob Marshall lived for the gamble. He bet everything, his marriage, his money, his reputation, on one final play. This murder-for-hire plot that he thought would solve all of his problems. Instead, he lost everything, and his story became one of the most infamous true crime cases in New Jersey. And this time, there was no coming back from it. Because in the end, the house always wins. After decades of solitary confinement, meaning Rob's sons couldn't even visit him, Rob got one last sliver of hope. In 2006, his death sentence was overturned when New Jersey had started trying to get rid of the death penalty in their state. His sentence was reduced to 30 years to life, making him eligible for parole in December 2014. But karma had other plans. On February 21st, 2015, less than a month before his first chance at parole, Rob Marshall died in prison at age 75. Cause of death? Natural causes? Poetic justice, maybe? So what happened to the others? Robert Cumber, he was released in 2006 after serving 20 years. Get this, he had been offered a much better plea deal early on, but he decided to take his chances. He lost because he chose to go to trial instead. Larry Thompson, his trial ended in a not guilty verdict. He filed a $50 million lawsuit for wrongful imprisonment. It failed. Then, in 2014, he confessed to being the one to pull the trigger in Maria's murder. By then, he was already in prison for armed robbery and attempted murder of a police officer. His earliest possible parole, 2071. He can't be retried or convicted in Maria's death because of double jeopardy. In 2017, he was also charged in that 1979 murder for hire of Deanna Montgomery, his friend's wife. Turns out Maria Marshall was not his first victim. Billy Wayne McKinnon got out of prison as soon as the trial ended. He had been sentenced to 5 years. He served about 1. He spent a few weeks in witness protection, but claimed it was boring and too restrictive. So he moved back to Louisiana like nothing happened. And James Davis, who really his name had just been used by McKinnon, was never charged with anything. Rob Marshall's case caught the attention of legendary true crime writer Joe McGinnis, who turned it into his 1989 bestseller, Blind Faith, which I read in preparation for this case. Really good. I highly recommend it. A year later, it was adapted into an Emmy-nominated TV miniseries starring Robert Urich as Rob Marshall and Joanna Kearns as Maria Marshall. And yes, that's Joanna Kearns from Growing Pains. During filming, Joanna Kearns became close with Robbie, who was serving as a consultant on the miniseries, and she introduced him to her TV daughter, actress Tracy Gold, who was also in Growing Pains. Robert and Tracy fell in love. They got married in 1994, and today they're raising 4 sons together. Rob Marshall lost everything: his wife, his freedom, and even the love and trust of his own children. His sons were left with nothing but grief and betrayal. Maria never really got justice, even after Larry Thompson confessed. And yet, out of all of this tragedy, her sons have thrived. Because if Maria left any legacy behind, it wasn't about betrayal, greed, or murder. It was about resilience. And in the end, that's the only kind of faith that ever wins. The end. What do you think?
Well, happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you.
Oh, I mean, what do we do at this point? There's a bunch of things I'm thinking about, like, why'd he even tell the cops he only had $2,000 on him? Why didn't he lie and say more was stolen?
Totally.
If he wanted his sons to lie for him and be on his team, I think that could have been planned better by, being there as a parent early on, being trustworthy to them. And I mean, just not a lot of planning around this. Also, somebody who loses at every point in life and somehow thinking that his history of wins will lead to another win and betting on it just to have it turn out to be another loss is...
Yep.
Ooh.
Because there's always the next one's a win, right? Just one more.
Yeah, old Rob is big old loser with loser history.
Oh, yeah. Pretty wild.
Wow.
Yeah. John, I guess, always believed that his father was innocent. He was only 13 when it happened. So when he was coming up for parole, Robbie and Chris wrote victim impact statements to keep Rob in prison. And John went the other way.
I mean, the hero here is Robbie.
Yeah, and Chris.
Robbie and Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out.
Yeah.
The writer of the book, what'd you say his name was?
His name is Joe McGinnis.
So Joe McGinnis, has he had anything else other than this book that he's spoken to or published?
On this case?
Yeah.
Not that I found. This was actually hard because in the book, he changed the names of everyone except for basically the Marshalls. And so when I was researching other things, it was hard to put in my mind who was who and who went where. It looks like he's got some other good true crime books and political investigative books. Oh, one about a groundbreaking expose on Richard Nixon.
Oh.
Yeah.
Was there anything more about the rose left? They saw her with it earlier. They saw it with her when she was dead.
Not that I could find.
Maybe Rob is just dramatic.
He might be. Or that image is so important to him, how he looks to everyone. His wife having that rose at the casino.
Yeah, he's definitely concerned with how he wants people to perceive him without really understanding how people actually perceive him, which is clear when he's not willing to have trial in Tom's River.
Oh, yeah. Pretty funny that it got moved to Atlantic City out of all places. It's a crazy case.
It's a crazy case. It's a beautiful story of love, of family and friendship.
Oh,
A little betrayal.
a lot of betrayal. I mean, I think the life lesson is keep an eye on those life insurance policies.
So would you say this is closer to an open and shut case? Like they kind of had it, they knew it, they had to go through the processes to...
Yeah, I would. Yeah, there's quite a few others that we've covered or are covering where someone is found guilty, but there's so many questions after. And this one, I mean, at least with Larry Thompson confessing in 2014, checks all the boxes. everything seems wrapped up by that point. It's because Rob talked to so many people all the time about what he was doing, why he was doing it. He was so stupid.
Yeah, there's definitely the people that are interesting, which are Rob and his wife. They're the people that are not interesting or their parts don't matter as much, like, Sarah, the mistresses, the new mistress. Again, those ones where their motives and everything don't matter as much. They didn't have the same commitment as Rob did. And
Yes.
yeah, just what was going on. I would love the story from when they were married until, the execution style end of it.
Yeah. Pretty wild after 20 years.
Pretty wild.
And Sarah had actually been in relationships prior, which came out during the trial, where they had promised her everything and then she gets bored and leaves. When they went to trial, she was back with her husband. Like nothing had happened. They even had one of those answering machine messages that went back and forth like every other phrase. Hi, this is
Brandon
and
Jenna.
Please leave us a message.
After the tone.
Beep. Just like that. And as far as I can tell, they stayed married for quite a while. She did lose her job as vice principal, though, when this came out.
Wow, it was 1984.
Yeah, it was. That was a long time ago.
It wasn't that long ago.
No, not at all. I really liked the New Jersey aspect of this since we were there for so long.
Oh, yeah, I'll take some Tom's River. I'll take some Jersey Shore, some Atlantic City.
Mays Landing.
Yeah, some GSP.
Uh-huh. Yep. You can just picture it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm there. I've seen the roadside stop.
Oh, yeah. Oyster Creek.
Oyster
stop.
Creek.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he had choices to pull over at one of the Wawas or something. And
Roy Rogers.
Top Stop, something like that.
Yeah.
Something better.
Anything was better, but not when you have this plan in mind.
Well, when you have a stupid plan in mind.
Yeah, then it makes a little more sense.
It does.
Yeah. Well, we hope you enjoyed this love story.
Yeah.
We want to wish you a happy Valentine's Day.
I hope it's not a repeater. Keep an eye out for the red flags.
Yeah, the giant red flags.
Red flags.
Especially if there are 12 of them.
Yep. And I just want to say how much I'm loving the podcast and the content you and your sisters are producing. I think
thanks, baby.
It's inspiring. It's exciting. I love listening to you all discuss, give your perspectives. I really appreciate any of the comments, the likes, subscribes. I just love seeing people interact and engage with your channel.
Me too.
Just hearing everybody say they wanted to have a husband in one of the episodes. It's something I never thought I'd be doing, but I actually really enjoyed sitting and having this conversation with you.
So you'll come back?
I will come back.
Okay,
I love
good.
you, babe.
I love you.
Valentine's
Happy
Day.
Valentine's Day.
Let's get to the rest of our Valentine's night now.
Yeah, let's wrap this up. Thank you for the kind words, though.
Love it. Love you.
Love you. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Crime Clueless. We're so grateful that you'll spend your time with us. If you're looking for a case summary or any resources that we used in writing this episode, head over to our blog. You can find it linked on our website, crimeclueless.com, under the contributors section. And if you have any of your own true crime stories or stories from your hometown, spooky stories, anything like that, we'd love to hear them and feature them on a future episode. You can send them to us at crimeclueless@gmail.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, and only if you enjoyed it, no, just kidding. We'd love if you would rate or review or share our podcast. Your support helps us reach more listeners and grow this amazing community. All right, babe, your line is not today, murderers, all right? Remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.
Perfect. Bye.
Bye.